This is Fresh Air. I'm Terry Gross. To privacy advocates, our guest Edward Snowden is a hero, a whistleblower who exposed abuses by government intelligence agencies. To others, he's a traitor who exposed national security secrets. Snowden was an IT systems expert working under contract for the National Security Agency in 2013 when he provided 3 journalists with thousands of top-secret documents about U.S. intelligence agencies' surveillance of American citizens. The revelations made Snowden a wanted man, accused of violating the Espionage Act. They also led to changes in the laws and standards governing U.S. intelligence agencies and the practices of U.S. technology companies, which now encrypt much of their web traffic for security. Snowden has lived for the past 6 years in Russia, out of reach of American law. He's written a new memoir about his life and his experiences in the intelligence community. It's called Permanent Record. Snowden spoke to Fresh Air's Dave Davies via an internet connection from Snowden's apartment in Moscow.
Well, Edward Snowden, welcome to Fresh Air. I want to begin with the suspicion that some have that you are a tool of the Russian government or collaborating with Russia. I know that you ended up in Russia, you stranded at the airport because you had released these documents to journalists in Hong Kong and had booked a flight to Quito, but after the first leg in Moscow, your passport was invalidated by the U.S. State Department, so you got stuck in Moscow. You met a Russian intelligence operative, you believe, at the airport that day in 2013. What was the conversation like?
You have to remember that I worked for the Central Intelligence Agency. I'm very skeptical of every intelligence service. At this point in my life, I've just worked with journalists to reveal mass surveillance. Now, I know, again, having been trained at the CIA, how to get through customs, what an interdiction at passport control looks like, very much what to expect if anybody's up to no good. And so the main thing is to survive getting through Russia, en route then to Cuba, Venezuela, and on to Ecuador. You have to travel through non-extradition countries, build a kind of air bridge to get one destination to the other from Hong Kong, because every direct flight from Hong Kong to Ecuador goes over U.S. airspace, right? So they can bring you down over California, which is a very problematic thing to be vulnerable to for a person in my position. So what I wasn't expecting was that the United States government itself, as you said, would cancel my passport. So I'm stopped at passport control, and there's this, the standard passport officer, and when I go through the line, he takes a little bit too long. He picks up the phone, he makes a call, and I realize it's longer than everybody else. And suddenly he looks at me and just says, there is problem with passport, come with. And so I'm led very quickly into this business lounge, which is very much not standard. Normally you'd be taken off to a security area, and I go in and it's a room full of Russian guys in business suits. And unmistakably, there's the old guy. He's in charge. And he begins to make what the CIA would call a cold pitch. Now, this is where you have no history, but they try to just say, do you want to cooperate with us? Now, this is a very unusual situation to be in for an intelligence officer, because these kind of pitches, requests for cooperation, are almost always made clandestinely. They're made in private where they can be denied. And the first thing I'm thinking about, because every alarm bell in my head is ringing, is, are they recording this? Are they using this to try to blackmail me, to coerce me? So immediately I go, look, I worked for the CIA. I know what this is. I know what this, how this is supposed to go. This is not going to be that kind of conversation. I'm not going to cooperate. I don't have any documentation with me, and this is something that publicly is not very well understood. But I destroyed my access to the archive. I had no material with me before I left Hong Kong, because I knew I was going to have to go through this complex multi-jurisdictional route. And so this was the moment where they tried, and he was basically saying, look, is there anything you can do? Is there any small piece of information, anything you share? Because life is going to be very difficult for a person in your situation if you don't have friends. No thanks, great, but I'm not interested. I'll be fine on my own. And then they get up and they say, I hope you won't regret your decision. It was a little bit of a sinister moment. And then they walk out.
So you declined the Russian intelligence request to cooperate then. You got stuck in the airport for 40 days because you didn't have a passport. They eventually grant you temporary asylum, right?
That's correct. And I actually, just to drill in there a little bit, you said something very important, which was that I was trapped in that airport for 40 days. Again, for those people who might be a little bit skeptical of me, if I had cooperated with the Russian government, right, if you think I'm a Russian spy, I would have been in that airport for 5 minutes before they drove me out in a limo, to the palace where I would be living for the rest of my days, before they, throw the parade where they call me a hero of Russia. Instead, I was trapped in this airport for 40 days where, instead of saying, Russia, please let me in, I applied for asylum in 27 different countries around the world, places like Germany, France, Norway, that I thought the U.S. government and the American public would be much more comfortable with me being there. And yet we saw something extraordinary happen, just one thing, which is that the U.S. government worked quite hard to make sure I didn't leave Russia, to the point that they actually grounded the presidential aircraft of the president of Bolivia, which is like grounding Air Force One. It's something that's really unprecedented in diplomatic history. And it's very much an open question today. Why did the U.S. government work so hard to keep me in Russia? We don't have a clear answer, and we may never have that until more people in the Obama administration start writing memoirs. But it's either they panicked or they realized this would be an evergreen political attack where they could just use guilt by association, people's suspicion of the Russian government, to try to taint me by proxy.
You say in the book that you applied for asylum to, I believe, 27 countries. Was Russia one of them?
At the very end, yes.
There's a sort of a circumstantial case of suspicion, right? I mean, since this happened in 2013, we've seen, the Russian interference in the U.S. election, its collaboration, according to the Mueller report, with WikiLeaks and getting stolen emails to affect the election. And I think there's just a general belief that in this authoritarian state, Edward Snowden wouldn't be able to live for 6 years unless he were useful to the Russian government. What's the general answer to that?
Yeah, I think this is for a lot of people who have sort of a Hollywood understanding of how international affairs and intelligence works. But the reality is, even in the case of, as you said, electoral interference, in the case of WikiLeaks, the Mueller report, the United States government itself never alleges that, for example, WikiLeaks even knew that they were talking to Russian intelligence. WikiLeaks' entire system is designed so they don't know who is submitting documents. And even granting that they came from Russian intelligence, that was in fact the case, every newspaper in the world thought these were newsworthy stories. The New York Times, the Washington Post, everybody was reporting on this. When you look beyond sort of the standard examples that we look at in the case of electoral interference, and we look toward my case, there is that question. If he's not cooperating with the Russian government, why would he be allowed to stay? And I think the answer here is actually quite obvious. Russia doesn't need to do anything, or rather, the Russian government doesn't need to do anything to look good in this circumstance. It shows that they have an independent foreign policy to their public, because I applied to all these other countries in Europe for asylum, and all of their governments, unfortunately, could be threatened to revoke their expressions of support. And this is a long and well-reported campaign where every time a country started to lean towards letting me in, it would be either the Secretary of State or the then Vice President of the United States that would call their foreign ministry and say, look, if you let this guy in, we're going to retaliate. And Russians very much consider themselves to be a European country. So if the rest of Europe is afraid to do something, and Russia is not afraid to do something, that makes Russians feel good. And remember, we did this in reverse. So Russia and the Soviet Union for the last 50 years. So, of course, if we have an example or an instance where the whole world sees basically the United States government is not living up to its values, the Russian government is going to be very eager just to underline that. That's all they need.
Do you receive any financial support from the Russian government?
No. This is one of the things that, again, is a common misconception. People sort of think about my life. They think I'm living in like a bunker. There's Russian guards. The Russian government and I have any contact whatsoever. They're paying me. No, I have my own apartment. I have my own income. I live a fully independent life. I have never and will never accept money or housing or any other assistance from the Russian government.
You didn't exactly have a typical adolescence. You ended up spending nights on the computer, school not of great interest to you. You tell the story of looking at the website of the Los Alamos National Laboratory, that did all this nuclear research, and discovering that anybody with a little understanding of computers and directory systems could get internal memos. You looked at confidential memos that were just available. You called the general number in the lab and left a message and said, this is a problem. You eventually got a call back. Tell us about that.
So my mother gets a little bit of a rude awakening because she's making dinner and I'm sitting in the living room on this computer. And she picks up the phone and says, yes, he's here. And she turns and looks at me. And as I see her hearing the other side of the call that I can't hear, her face just gets pale. And she looks at me and her eyes grow wide. And she covers the receiver and she says, "What did you do?" And when I get up out of my chair and I pick up the phone and this man says, "I'm from Los Alamos Nuclear Laboratory," these were the sweetest words anyone could have told me in a moment, because I'm like, oh, thank God. Because I had left that message, because I had called them, because I hadn't really done anything wrong. I had simply been curious, and as a Boy Scout, I had called this facility and said, hey, there's something broken on your website. You should do something about that. My mother did not punish me for this. In fact, she was very proud of the fact that I told them they had a weakness in their website. And Los Alamos, for all things, once they realized I was a child, I think they had been expecting someone older, they said when I turned 18, I should give them a call.
You wanted to use your skills. Your skills were in the area of computers. And you get your way into the intelligence, find your way into the intelligence community. Critics belittle you as saying you were just a private contractor. I mean, you did work as actually a CIA employee for a period of time, but you worked for a lot of private contractors, working for the NSA and the CIA. You want to just explain the role of private contractors in the intelligence community?
There are congressionally mandated limits on the head count for executive agencies such as the NSA, such as the CIA. And so no matter how much money they get in their budget, and we all know it goes up year after year after year, no matter what, they have to work very hard to get additional head count to hire more people. So what these intelligence agencies, and really the defense industry in general, came up with was if they can just shake down Congress for a little bit more money each year, they can actually give this money to private companies, defense contractors as we now know them, which can then send their personnel, who on paper will work for a Dell or a Lockheed Martin or a Booz Allen Hamilton. On paper, they work for a private company, but in reality, they go into NSA headquarters, the CIA headquarters. And so the reality is today, people don't realize it, but the work of government, the work of intelligence, is as frequently performed by employees of private companies as it is performed by military or government personnel.
You had a lot of jobs in the intelligence community. You were actually a CIA officer in Geneva for a while. You ended up in Tokyo after that, and then Hawaii. And you write that the material that you distributed to journalists ultimately documented an array of abuses so diverse that nobody was ever in a position to know all of them, or really to find out even a fraction. You had to go looking. And what set you looking was an assignment to do a presentation about China. You want to explain this?
So, I'm invited to give a presentation about how China is hacking the United States intelligence services, defense contractors, anything that we have available on the network, which I know a little bit about, but not that much about, because they have the person who's supposed to be giving the presentation drop out. So I go looking. I use my network access to pull all the slide decks, all of the presentation, all of the training that's previously been given. I pull all of the recent reporting on what's happening. I work late into the night seeing what exactly is it that China is doing. What are their capabilities? Are they hacking? Are they doing domestic surveillance? Are they doing international surveillance? What is occurring? And I'm just shocked by the extent of their capabilities. I'm appalled by the aggression with which they use them, but also in a strange way, surprised by the openness with which they use them. They're not hiding it. They're just open and out there saying, yeah, we're doing this. Yeah, you know we're hacking you. What are you going to do about it? And I think this is a distinction. I think, yes, the NSA is spying. Of course they're spying. But we're only spying overseas. We're not spying on our guys at home. We wouldn't do that. We have firewalls. We have tripwires for people to hit. But surely these are only affecting terrorists because we're not like China. But this plants the first seeds of doubt where I see if the capability is there, perhaps somewhere hidden deep, even inside the United States government, the appetite for how they can use these capabilities remains the same.
Right. So you explore further, and what do you discover about what the NSA is actually doing?
So over the final years of my career, I see that we have the same capabilities as the Chinese government, and we are applying them domestically, just as they are. We have an internal strategy at the NSA, which was never publicly avowed, but it was all over their top secret internal slides, that said the aspiration was to collect it all. What this means was they were not just collecting and intercepting communications from criminals, spies, terrorists, people of intelligence value. They were collecting it on everyone, everywhere, all of the time, just in case, because you never know what's going to be interesting, and if you miss it when it's passing by, you might not get another chance. And so what happened was every time we wrote an email, every time you typed something into that Google search box, every time your phone moved, you sent a text message, you made a phone call, increasingly the United States government, without giving the public a vote, we weren't allowed to know this as a public, but in secret, the boundaries of the Fourth Amendment were being changed. This was without even the vast majority of members of Congress knowing about it. And this is when I start to think about maybe we need to know about this. Maybe if Congress knew about this, maybe if the courts knew about this, we would not have the same policies as the Chinese government.
Right. So, but to be clear about what you discovered, you were talking about bulk collection of all of these electronic communications, which are then kept for how long and where? I mean, how do they have the capacity for this?
So this is a great question. What we're describing largely here is me discovering something called the Stellar Wind program, a classified Inspector General report into the Bush-era warrantless wiretapping program and what came out of it. Turns out it wasn't just about phones. It was, as you say, internet communications. And this is the core difference. It's not phone or internet. It's targeted versus untargeted. Historically, the United States intelligence community has only been performing and only been authorized to perform targeted surveillance. You look at a bad guy, you tap their communications, you intercept those communications, you put that in the database, you store it, you search it, you do whatever you want. But you know,
and you get a court order for it, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so in many cases, yes, particularly for use in the criminal justice system. But now they've automated and expanded the system so it's not targeted. It's a dragnet that hits everyone everywhere. And this is only happening because for the first time, it's technically possible. It's easy, it's cheap, and because they've secretly co-opted, either through coercion or seduction, the major internet giants, Microsoft, Apple, Google, Facebook, into sharing their information with the U.S. intelligence community, sometimes through a process of secret court orders. Everything is available to them, and they try to store it for as long as they can because they don't know when it's going to be useful. And so as technology progresses, this distance for which they store it becomes close to forever. One of the NSA's close partners, AT&T, the telecommunications company, stores phone records now for people in the United States going all the way back to 1987. If you've got kids, or you yourself are born after 1987, they have every phone call that you ever made. They keep the records of your movements, of your cell phone, basically what cell phone tower you're connected to. And, you know, that changes as you go driving, as you move throughout the world. They store the movements for everyone on their network that they can, going back to 2008. And we expect these to grow, right? Eventually, our entire lives will be in this ever-growing permanent record of human activity.